Good evening and welcome to We the People, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Minneapolis. My name is Joan Higginbotham and I'll be your host for this evening's program. Tonight we have with us as our guest Andrea Jenkins, and Andrea is the Vice President of the Minneapolis City Council. And that is just one of the many things that Andrea has done in a very busy life. I don't know how she has time for it all. So we're going to talk a little bit about the many things that she's done and how she sees our city as we're moving ahead in the 21st century. Well, great to have you with us, Andrea. Thanks for coming.
It's great to be here, Joan. How are you this evening?
Good, thank you. Well, you know, the thing about you, Andrea, is that you did a lot of stuff before you even got into politics per se.
Yes,
You know, I know that you're a poet.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you have done readings and write. Do you still write poetry?
I still write poetry. In fact, you ask, I just co-edited a new book of poems that is coming out this month.
Really?
In mid-April. And it is called Queer Voices, Poetry, Prose, and Pride. And it's being published by the Minnesota Historical Press. So we're really proud, myself, John Maderos, Lisa Brimmer, co-edited, and it culminates 13 years of the Queer Voices reading series that John and I co-hosted at the Intermedia Arts, which is no longer with us, but I'm so proud of our time there and the voices that we were able to elevate and lift up. And so this anthology is going to come out, and I have one new poem in there. So we try to keep busy writing and, you know, keeping the creativity flowing. I think it helps to balance some of these political times that we're in right now.
That could be for sure. Well, now, so this is the Minnesota Historical Society Press. Very good.
Yes.
But now this is just a part of your activism. You have been an activist for a long time.
Yes, indeed.
So what are some of the things that you've done? You've made history.
Wow, yeah, well, we got elected on the Minneapolis City Council in 2017, and that was a big deal. You know, I think anybody stepping up and running for a public service is really a big thing for their communities. But being the first African American, you know, transgender woman to be elected to public office in a major city, I think, you know, is a really, really big deal. And I'm really proud that, you know, my colleagues, my peers on the council, elected me as vice president.
And this was your first term.
In my first term, so that was a big honor, and it's a big responsibility.
Yes.
And it gives me an opportunity, I think, to think more broadly about the issues that are impacting the city beyond just the issues in my own ward.
So what is your ward like?
So I represent the 8th Ward in Minneapolis, which is just a little south of Lake Street on the west side of 35W. And so it goes from 35W west to Lindale Avenue, and then south to 46th Street. And then on the east side of the freeway, it crosses over the freeway, and on the east side of the freeway, it starts at 36th Street and goes all the way to 50th, or the creek, Minnehaha Creek, and then over to Bloomington. And so it's a diverse ward. It's diversity of housing stock, diversity of ethnicities, diversity of incomes, diversity of identities. It's a very sort of eclectic ward, if you will, but it certainly was home to many of the, I think, middle-class African Americans historically, and which is the neighborhood that I live in, the Bryant neighborhood. But also you go, you know, west over to Kingfield, and it's sort of the beginning of the southwest area of town. And so you have a lot of younger families with young children, and I would say, middle income, upper middle income families. But then on the east side of the freeway, there's a lot of immigrant communities, Somali, Latinx, African American communities. And so not as affluent in many instances as some of our neighbors to the west. But one of the big projects that I'm working on in the ward and throughout the city is developing what we're calling cultural districts. And these cultural districts will help us to create economic opportunities, housing opportunities in neighborhoods that have been historically disinvested in over time. There was a great documentary that just came out a couple of months ago called The Jim Crow of the North.
I saw that.
Yeah.
It was revelation to me.
Revelation to me is what I mean, and I knew I had been working on this project with many of the students from the University of Minnesota and the professors. They were calling it Mapping Prejudice. But then when the documentary came out, it was so vivid and so visual, and I think so impactful to actually see and hear and talk to the neighbors and the families that had experienced these injustices. And so these cultural districts are in some ways an effort to try to repair some of those harms that have been done.
Is it going to sort of celebrate those cultures? Or?
Certainly celebrate those cultures, try to encourage and increase investment in those communities, lift up, entrepreneurs of color from the various communities. So we're thinking about cultural districts like 38th Street, which runs almost directly in the middle of my ward, across the entire ward.
I know exactly where it is. Some good restaurants in that neighborhood.
Some very good restaurants. And there's the New Sword Co-op, the Sabantany Community Center, the Minnesota Spokesman and Recorder, newspaper, Tiny Diner, as you
yes, that's what I was thinking about.
mentioned. And so we really want to work on revitalizing that corridor. But I think this cultural districts is one of the big projects that I'm seeing as a part of the work that I hope to.
Well, you've got a
accomplish
real
on the
United
council.
Nations there. I mean, it has representation of all the different communities that we see in our city,
Absolutely.
which makes it interesting
It
place
makes
to
it very
be.
interesting, and it's felt really good to have that level of diversity elect me to office. So
Well, you were not a stranger to these folks, though. Hadn't you worked you'd worked for two different members of the council before?
in this very ward.
Yeah.
And so I was very familiar with the neighbors, very familiar with the issues that impact the ward, familiar with the organizations that make up the ward. So yeah, I had a little bit of a head start there.
And you got what percentage of the vote?
73%.
That's what I thought.
believe.
I wouldn't have mentioned it, but it seemed rather astounding that that for your first time out.
Yeah, it was an incredible feeling. We had a great campaign team, and we really got the message out. The thing that I'm really proud of, more so than just the percentage, but the fact that we increased voter turnout by
really?
11%.
Wow, 11%.
11%, and that is a very, as you know, representing the League of Women Voters, that's a pretty high bar.
It is.
And so I was really, really proud of my team, and I think a lot of that was younger voters that we were able to get out, and so yeah, that felt really good.
Well, that's when you say younger voters. I also noticed younger council members.
Yes.
Is the city turning over? We have a young mayor. We have some young council members. Is it a new generation that's taking leadership?
I'm going to posit, Joan, that the country is shifting, and we are seeing younger, brighter folks stepping up into leadership all around the country, and certainly here in Minneapolis. I think the average age of our council is probably right around 37. I haven't done the math,
Right.
but just doing it off the top of my head, we're pretty close to that, 37, 38.
And
as
the
an
mayor
average.
also fits into that.
I'm pulling it up to the
You're
to
changing
the
the-
higher edge, but yes, we have a very youthful mayor. Think about the fact that one of the leading candidates in the Democratic primary for president is 38 years old.
That's right.
And so and many of them are in their mid 40s. So I think the leadership shift is happening nationwide.
Not just here in the Twin Cities.
Not just here in the Twin Cities.
Well, when you first started your career here in the Twin Cities, as I recall, you were working at the university, and you were I know that you did some work cataloging the credit collection.
Right. So I was the good fortune to have been the oral historian for the Transgender Oral History Project, which lives at the Tretter Collection at the University of Minnesota. It's the largest collection of oral histories in the transgender community in the entire world. Really proud of it. We conducted 187 interviews. They're all up. They just went up last Thursday. All of the interviews in their entirety at the University of Minnesota. So it's www.trettercollection.uofm.edu, or you can just Google Trans Oral History Project at the University of Minnesota, and it'll take you directly right to the
Now, how did you
page.
find? Are these people all Minnesota people too, or?
No, Joan, these are people from all over the country.
Really?
It was such an amazing project. Again, the thing that I'm most proud of about this project is the diversity of voices that we were able to collect. It started out as being really focused on the upper Midwest, but we interviewed folks in Florida, Philadelphia, Georgia, New York City, Chicago, Wisconsin, Iowa,
And you traveled
North
all over to
Dakota.
find these people.
I got to travel all over the country, conducting these interviews all throughout the state of Minnesota. So we wanted to make sure we had rural voices, urban voices, young people, different identities, male identified, trans folks. The oldest person in the project was 94 years old, and the youngest person is an 18-year-old Somali kid.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing that you could find these people and that they could all tell their stories.
Absolutely.
Now, how are they accessible to anybody?
They're accessible to anybody online, or you can go to the Tretter Collection and read the transcripts there. But you can read the transcripts online, but if you're the kind of person you want to take notes and do research, you can go there and read the transcripts, or you can listen via audio. So there are 3 different formats: video, audio, and
So it would be really valuable for researchers.
absolutely. Researchers, filmmakers, artists, writers, I think.
When you think of this 94-year-old gentleman, I mean, it's a part of history that you need to get it now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a 90-year-old woman.
Oh, okay.
And she had her surgery here at the University of Minnesota.
Now, but the
fascinating.
Tretter Collection it's all kinds of LGBTQ
Yes.
information. It's books and
It's
everything.
books, literature. We have the papers of Alan Spears, who helped to craft the Human Rights Act here in Minnesota. I think was the first out gay legislator in the history of Minnesota.
Wow.
And you know, the log cabin Republicans. We have the papers of Free, which was one of the first gay liberation organizations in the country.
So it's just a soup to nuts. It's
Yeah,
everything.
absolutely. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender now. It's a great collection.
And here
It's the second largest collection in the country.
Wow. And Mr. Tretter started it with his papers and
Yes.
his information.
And his collection
Yeah.
and his
Great.
collecting, yeah.
Well, so you moved on and you worked for both, who you worked for?
Councilmember Elizabeth Glidden and Councilmember Robert Lilligren prior to that.
And they were both in that same neighborhood that you're in now.
The very same ward, though Robert was redistricted out of the 8th Ward, which created opportunity for Elizabeth to run. But yeah, I worked with both of them throughout all of the iterations of the 8th Ward. And so got to know a lot of people, really got to understand the process of, you know, how to lead in the community, how to really reach out to the neighbors and hear about the things that people are concerned about, and then figuring out the ways to take action and speak up on behalf of those neighbors in the halls of power.
So now I see how you could do that because you've had all this experience. How did these young people, when they are pretty young, how did they do that? What was their background? Is there anything common to that? Because it seems to me that you have to have some kind of a history before you can get elected. But many of them had not been elected ever before.
No, none of them had been elected. I think not many of them even thought about running for office
really?
for a very long time. But, you know, Jeremy Schrader, who was recently elected, he is an attorney. You know, he worked in housing for a long time. He at the state legislature, advocating on behalf of housing organizations and homelessness issues.
So he saw a need.
So he saw a need, and so he came with some really valuable experience and a background. Philippe Cunningham, who is also transgender identified, city council member, African American, was elected over on the north side. He's representing Ward 4. He was policy aide to Mayor Hodges. So he had some experience. He's a teacher. He was a former teacher, and he's really passionate about youth issues and some of the violence that's happening over in North Minneapolis. And so, you know, he was a school teacher in the Chicago public school system.
Wow.
And so he's had some experience being concerned about those issues and thinking about them on a policy level. Jeremiah Ellison, who is
it's in his blood.
It's in his blood. His father is the Attorney General, and his mother is a school board member. But he brings his own self to the council, and he's a extremely talented professional artist, and he brings that work to that creativity to the work. He was a staff member at Juxtaposition Arts prior to joining the council, and
So another artist to join you.
right, exactly. And then, you know, Steve Fletcher, who represents the third ward, also has a strong history and background in labor organizing and wage advocacy. He led the fight for $15 minimum wage. So, I mean, I think people came from
They
different
did, but they've
different
all had
backgrounds.
some passion that
Right.
drew them to do this.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, let's talk about some of the hot issues. And we were talking about this before, but it seems to me that housing in Minneapolis is really a big problem for everybody. I mean, you know, I'm thinking about young people who want to stay in the city,
Sure.
but they can't find a house that they can afford.
Right. Well, you
And
know,
then I think about people who have no house at all.
no house at all. We had a major encampment
Yeah.
last year.
And what is going to happen to the Navigation Center? Isn't it closing soon?
So we hope that we are going to be able to transition all the folks at the Navigation Center to some more stable, hopefully permanent housing situations. And we certainly have had some success at moving a lot of people. There are still some people there, but yeah, we need to have that Navigation Center cleared out by May, so that they can begin the housing development that's being slated to
So they're going to build other housing there.
Yeah, the Red Lake Nation, who has been really a great partner in helping with the Navigation Center and allowing us to create the Navigation Center on property that they had already had slated for a housing development, affordable housing development. So, you know, we're hoping that is going to then become a more permanent navigation type center, so we can have spaces for people to, you know, get settled, get situated, try to get their heads together and figure out some long-term solutions. We're trying a lot of things that hopefully is going to help increase density in the city. Or
is that popular?
I mean, density. And I was going to just mention the 2040 comprehensive plan, which is popular, I would say, but a lot of those voices that were really in favor of the plan were relatively silent. You know, they would talk to me and my colleagues, you know, privately, but never really publicly. And so the voices that we heard more publicly were those in opposition to the plan. And, you know, I think there were some valid concerns, but I think we are in a situation where we have these very dire, critical needs, and we have to try.
Well, the needs aren't only at the very low
solutions.
end. I mean, as I said before, these families that are just starting out and want to buy their first house.
Right. No, they're at every income level, every housing level. Our vacancy rate in the Twin Cities right now is right around 2.1%. So there are very few houses available to buy, and there are very few apartments available to rent. So we need to create more housing. And so the 2040 plan upzoned many parts of the city so that we can build more dense housing in places where it makes sense, along transit corridors, in places where we already have transit investments, transportation investments happening. And so that hasn't been popular with, again.
I'm thinking about South Minneapolis, you know,
Yeah,
we love our
Southwest
single-family
Minneapolis, I
homes.
would say, yeah, where there are a number of single-family homes. And again, people are rightfully concerned. I am positive that I know the city is not going to purchase all the housing and tear them down and build fourplexes and apartment buildings.
We are a little concerned.
But, you know, as people sell their homes, as people move to different kinds of housing, then those do become opportunities for creating more dense, more density, so that, you know, people are coming here and they
want to live in the city,
someplace
which is a
to
good
live.
thing.
Yeah, it's a very
Well,
good
we
thing.
we couldn't finish up without talking about public safety.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a big issue. People are concerned.
Yeah, absolutely.
But is Minneapolis, what are we doing to make people feel less concerned, I guess?
Well, you know, I think we are doing some really positive things in the city of Minneapolis. You know, I want to note it's April 3rd. I think we have had 7 homicides in the city thus far.
This year.
This year. It is by no means great, but that's relatively few
For a city of our size.
For a city of our size. We just established the Office of Violence Prevention, which brings together all of our, the city of Minneapolis, I think, has been on the cutting edge of thinking about gun violence and street violence as a public health issue. And so, not many communities have taken that approach. And I think it allows us, what it does is it allows us to look at it more systemically and look at, what are some of the root causes of violence. I mean, people don't just wake up and want to pick up a gun and shoot each other, right? There's some very, I think, long-term things that are in place to create these conditions. And what are those? And as well as how are people getting access to guns? Where are these guns coming from? Looking at all of these issues a little more holistically. So I'm thrilled that we created this Office of Violence Prevention that will bring all of these resources and things together, working with MPD, working with community members, to create a network of opportunities and outreach for young people who may be involved in group violence.
So it's not just the police that have to solve these problems.
It has to be the
citizens,
whole community.
the whole community.
It has to be our healthcare system. It has to be our court systems. We have to get involved. We're really looking at bail reform and how do we stop criminalizing people for being poor.
Right. Yes.
Yes. And so a lot of things on the public safety front that I'm really proud of.
Well, we've had a very quick tour of life in Minneapolis and also the life of Council Member Andrea Jenkins. So, Andrea, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thanks to you for tuning in to We the People, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Minneapolis. This is Joan Higginbotham saying thanks for joining us. We hope you'll tune in again. Good night.